Solange Moujane joins me on the set for today's press review. Hi, Solange.
Hi,
still lots of focus on the war in Ukraine, but particularly on how Russian forces seem no longer to be gaining ground.
Yeah, as we enter the second month of fighting, papers are taking stock of this conflict. And the French paper La Croix is wondering if this war is becoming one of stalemates, of using civilians down and soldiers as well. It asks, with Ukrainians taking back and clinging to areas, whether, quote, Russia is going to get stuck in the mud as Moscow continues its incursion. On the diplomatic front, there are ongoing shifts in stances as well. The FT notes as diplomatic talks begin in Turkey that Russia is no longer demanding, quote, a denazification of Ukraine, and that it would be willing to let the country join the European Union if it remains militarily not aligned with NATO. Now, the FT says that this is according to 4 sources briefed on negotiations.
Now, these potential positions are still being taken with a big grain of salt, though, by Ukrainians themselves.
Yeah, Le Temps, the Swiss paper, tells us that the threat that Moscow go back on its word remains palpable, especially since Russia broke accords like the Budapest Memorandum of 1994 when it invaded Ukraine. Now, such mistrust means that amassing weapons and fighting will remain the focus, according to Le Figaro, which writes as well that there is, quote, a timid road ahead for negotiations. And the paper wonders whether talks began too early, too soon, as no one knows when both sides will be, quote, ready for a political and territorial solution. Now, adding to these tense negotiations, there's another out-of-this-world element, which is allegations of poisoning. The Wall Street Journal explains that the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich and 2 other negotiators may have suffered from poisoning earlier this month. According to people familiar with the March 3rd talks, they suffered from red eyes, painful tearing, peeling skin, and the oligarch even was blinded for a few hours. Now, who is responsible, be it hardliners in Moscow or someone else? This remains a mystery. This is all according to an investigator said, though, that was quoted in the journal, quote, it was not intended to kill, but rather it was just a warning.
All right. Now, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, has really been playing a central role in trying to find some sort of diplomatic way out of the crisis.
Yeah, according to the New York Times, Macron has held 17 talks with Vladimir Putin and 25 with Volodymyr Zelensky in the past 4 months. And the paper says that the French president cannot be accused of putting putting in the efforts to avert, defuse, and stop the war. It writes, though, if diplomacy is measured by perseverance, Macron is a supreme diplomat, end quote. But the article continues saying, if diplomacy is measured by effective realism, the verdict appears to be less favorable. And John Litchfield, the columnist, wonders in Unheard the extent to which fear is a motivator in Macron's diplomatic efforts. This comes after Zelensky told The Economist that Macron and Western leaders haven't given tanks to Ukraine out of fear of Russia, to which French officials replied, frightened of Russia, no, frightened of a nuclear war, yes. All the same, Litchfield's conclusion is similar to the Times's, that Macron's diplomacy has, quote, achieved nothing so far, end quote.
In the meantime, the French president is certainly focusing on the first round of the presidential election that is less than 2 weeks away.
Yeah, as Libération explains, Macron has fully and finally entered the race. Not only did he surround himself with crowds of supporters in Dijon on Monday, but he got some jabs in. Accused of not being confrontational enough towards other candidates, Libé says Macron checked that box by saying that Éric Zemmour's excuses might be a disgrace. This was in reference to the far-right candidates, saying that he didn't hear his supporters chanting Macron assassin or Macron the murderer this past weekend. But Macron's campaign is not without thorns in its side. Le Parisien tells us that the McKinsey affair continues, quote, to stick to the president like a Band-Aid. It's referring here to the government paying millions to McKinsey, a private American consultancy firm which didn't for years pay taxes in France. The government denies any wrongdoing, but a Senate report has shown that the use of such firms more than doubled in the first 4 years of Macron's presidency, with such services, get this, costing over €1 billion in 2021.
Solange, you've also been taking a look at the Will Smith scandal after he slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars.
Yeah, and it's proving to be quite inspirational for cartoonists. Will Smith has publicly apologized for slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars, but Hollywood itself has been damaged by the incident. That's according to Patrick Blower. He's drawn the Hollywood sign with a few letters missing as Smith drives away with his Oscar. Now, for Matt Golding, the cartoonist says it's the Oscar himself that's lost his head for the slap. The best Oscar win for Smith, and then Smith's acceptance speech have managed to win the prize for normalizing violence. And for Brian Adcock, this is my favorite of the day. Smith is in need of a good dose of anger management therapy alongside Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin.
All right, Solange, just to wrap up now, you have found an article about happiness.
Yeah, I couldn't leave us with cartoons about violence, so I found a chicken and egg story. Slate.fr wonders what comes first, happiness or success. And studies have actually been done on this, and Slate tells us that they show that happiness is key. The article explains that you can be unhappy. We all know the people who are like this, be unhappy and successful. But if you are happy, you have a greater shot at being consistently successful in your life because you are doing and you are at your best.
Oh, well, that's nice to know, Solange. Thank you. Something to aspire to.
Exactly.
Solange, thank you so much for that. Solange Mougin with In the Press. Don't forget, if you want to get a closer look at the press review, you can always check it out, of course, on our website. And you can also check it out on our podcast. So just look for In the Press wherever you get your favorite podcasts.